to talk to you today about sustainable event planning, and I like to take a holistic approach to most things that I do, so I threw that in there as well. How does this work? Oh my god. Left, right. I found it. You already know that, so we're gonna skip it. So today I'm going to talk to you through some of the, education philosophy points through sustainability and how it pertains to event planning. Going to give you some examples of how it is implemented in practice, and then also talk about the goals a little bit. If I touch this, will it break? Can I tilt it? No, thanks. Great, awesome, amazing. Yay. So this kind of philosophy element is what we're going to start with. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So this definition comes to us from the UN World Commission on Environment and Development. As a political science student, the UN is kind of where we look to for a lot of these things in my degree field. And I want you to think about this when you're looking at what holistic means, at how you apply sustainability in your own life. So something I like to bring up here is I took a class with Professor Lana Whiskey-Jack called Indigenous Genders and Sexualities, and she talked about how they approach looking at the future. So they have something called the 7 generations principle in their culture. Some apply this meaning that you look 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, but the most common approach is that you yourself are that person in the middle and you're looking 3 generations back to the wisdom of your ancestors, but also 3 generations forward to what your children and their children will be experiencing and how your actions will impact them. And that's kind of, that approach really struck me, and I've taken it to heart a lot. I mean, it's the perfect way, I think, of looking at our impacts. I know a lot of people in my circles in political science will talk about how we're often represented in state and government by people who may or may not be alive when the climate crisis starts to affect a lot of us. But if we look forward and we appreciate the needs of those in the future, then anyone of any age and any background can address sustainability. And then why sustainability? We've covered a lot of this already with some of the other talks before me. So the climate crisis, of course, is probably the biggest issue, and we're all kind of aware of that. So we want to minimize our carbon footprint. We want to limit the impact that our big celebrations in life are having on the life of the planet. Accessibility is a part of sustainability, again, bringing in that holistic nature. We want everyone to have access. If you are planning an event for a certain group of people, you have to make it accessible to everyone within that group. So if you're addressing university students and you say pick a location that's not wheelchair accessible, your event really isn't for all university students. It's really only for university students who have the physical ability to attend your event. So looking at that is always also a part of sustainability. Cost as well. A lot of the time people say this is a myth, that sustainability is always more expensive. It's really not. Sometimes sustainability has a larger upfront cost because we're having to change systems that have been in place for a very long time. But in the end, a lot of the time, most of the time, sustainability ends up costing us a lot less because a lot of it is really about reusing the one thing again and again and again and implementing these new systems that we then don't have to pay to change again. And future-proof, all of these things, of course, are going to be very helpful to those in the future coming after us, but also that we are not harming the future. This, I thought I'd bring in a pop culture moment here. These are some numbers you might have seen floating around the internet, but they are from Taylor Swift's recent Eras tour. So the CO2 emissions from her private jet, the distance many audience members are traveling to see her concert, and the venues and countries. So I wanted to scale this up, because when we think events, I'm like, my 11-year-old niece's birthday party, probably not the largest carbon footprint on Earth. But if we see each of these concerts as an event, and there's an event planner, her manager, who's putting these into impact, probably didn't buy her a train ticket, probably didn't account for all these things. So imagine adding up all of the confetti, the one-time outfits everybody bought to go, that sequin top that looked really good that one time, and then it fell apart, that kind of thing. And the single-use plastic cups at these events, like if you go to the arena to a concert, you're probably gonna get your little beverage in a little plastic cup. All those things added up over time. So this is, of course, a huge scale. I don't think many of us in this room are going to interact with events that are this big. I certainly haven't, but it's nice to see it scaled up. So maybe every single 11-year-old's birthday party in the world might add up to this one day. Probably not, but we can kind of scale things in that manner. So now we turn to some more elements of it. So catering and food. I really don't have to say much on this because of the presenter before me. She really covered it very well. So I'm going to go plant-based first. Of course, that was really well covered. It has pretty much the same implications that she talked about. If you're throwing an event, you want to lower the carbon footprint, plant-based menu. That also goes into that accessibility point before. When I'm planning events for women in leadership on campus, we send out our forms, right? Your Google form, you fill it out, what are your dietary restrictions? And we get dairy-free, and we get halal, and we get kosher, and we get all of these different dietary restrictions, let alone allergies that people have. You cut that in half, essentially, when you go plant-based, because you don't have to worry, is someone lactose intolerant? Is someone's meat not prepared the way they need it to be prepared? You have to worry about a lot less. And then you can just say, okay, it's vegan, and here's a gluten-free option. I mean, that's a bit simplified, but essentially it cuts a lot of your planning, cuts a lot of your cost, makes life easier for your catering. Then waste, of course. Something that we did with the Women in Leadership event is we made it paperless, and the only papers that we did have to use for like putting a sign on the door, they were seed paper. So you could, at the end, pretty much chuck that somewhere, probably bury it so it doesn't look awful, but essentially the paper dissolves and then the rest are native wildflower seeds. So you're aiding biodiversity. That's a very specific example, but just looking at every element of your event and how you can minimize waste. In the background, we see all this beautiful confetti here, and there are many confetti options that are sustainable. There's ones made of leaf waste. There's people throw rice at weddings. That's already pretty sustainable. But just limiting those little bits of plastic that you really don't need. Containers, of course. You can request people to bring containers to your event if you might have leftover food that they can take home. This is also a little bit of an address to food insecurity. I know the Emerging Leaders program at the University of Alberta, they had this at their event that I attended last year. I thought it was a great idea. I thought it was an amazing thing to implement, especially if you're not sure on your numbers, so you kind of overshoot the catering. I tend to do that. And of course, the dietary needs. I already covered that when I talked about the plant-based elements. And materials, also covered that a little bit. Party favors, swag. A lot of the times we go to conferences as students, especially if you're in something like business or you're in political science, you're going to meet people, and you're going to get cups, and you're going to get magnets, and you're going to get lanyards, and you're going to get all these things that really you're probably never going to use again. And if you give it to a thrift store, no one's going to buy it because it has like Ford Motor Company stamped on the front of it. But yeah, limiting things like that and giving something more impactful. So a friend of mine, for their wedding favor was that the wedding photographer would also take a couple photos of you and your guest, you and your partner, or you and yourself, because oftentimes we're not dressed that nice at any other time. So it was a really cool favor to have a beautiful picture of you and your family attending this wedding, dressed to the nines, taken by a professional photographer, and everybody got to take that memory home and print out their pictures and give those away. Versus something that just like a little Mr. and Mrs. shot glass that ends up in every value village I've ever been to. For promotional materials as well, like I said, going paperless, giving those online campaigns, going viral on TikTok, and boom, suddenly your event is full. It's really nice that way, so you don't have to hang up a flyer and all that. We've probably seen them walking around our halls, those big cork boards where every flyer is covered by at least 2 other flyers. Don't know if anybody's really getting a good look at those. And yeah, dishes, I wanted to shout out the Sustain SU's reusable dish program that the university offers. If you're planning an event here, or if you're reviewing an event you attended, you can say, hey, use the reusable dish program. It's for free, so you can always have that available to you as well. And clothing, like I said, maybe you're choosing to wear something to an event. It's really nice to normalize re-wearing things. I think in the age of fast fashion, it's often seen as something that you can't do. It's like a faux pas to wear the same shirt to 2 fancy events, and then you have the same pictures on your social media but like we should normalize people having a smaller closet, and also not making your dress code so inaccessible. I know a lot of times people have come up to me because women in leadership events tend to have business formal or business casual, somewhere in between there, dress codes, and they ask, oh, I don't think I can go, I don't have anything like that in my closet. And it's something that we addressed, that we were like, oh yeah, we should have thought of that. So now we have like examples of everyday clothes that could fit in those categories, and we don't want anyone to miss out because they don't want to go spend that money on new clothes. And then a little bit about location. So I already touched on accessibility a bit in the terms of wheelchair accessibility. So knowing who your guests are, knowing how they're going to get there, but also transportation. Is it on a golf course in the middle of nowhere where I can't get to on a bus because I don't have a car? Looking at all of that kind of thing. The energy use. So if everyone's getting there by a car, maybe you can suggest carpooling. And maybe even providing, I know there's apps that let people who are going to the same event carpool together, many ways of organizing that. Land use as well. Where is your event located? Like we did in a land acknowledgement when we started, it's important to center yourself in place and understand the history of the place where you are located. And safety, of course, is another element. If my friend and I are going to the same event, I'm taking public transportation, she's taking a car, that might be a very unsafe experience for me depending on where this event is located. Even in Edmonton, you think some of the, quote, nicer places where people have events, like the Fairmont, is right on Jasper Avenue, not always the safest place to walk down at night alone. So looking into something like that, of course the University of Alberta offers Safe Walk, but we're not always on campus. Touching on accessibility again, you can see this is kind of a favorite theme of mine. Wheelchair access, dietary restrictions is also part of accessibility. If you're going to be having an event where none of the food is, say, halal, well, you're alienating a lot of people. Or if you're not offering any vegetarian or vegan options, you're also alienating some folks. So really know your audience, know your attendees, and adjust them, price as well. I know a lot of the times you see the kind of hypocrisy in that when there's bigger galas or beautiful events held and they're like something like for unhoused women or for orphans, for this group of people. And then you go to the event and nobody from that group is there because none of them can afford to go there. None of them can get transportation there. None of them can get the clothes to go there. Of course, maybe they'll have their one token person from that group who's there, but that's not always the case, even that. So just, if you're addressing an issue, if you're trying to be there for a group of people, make sure that they can also be there when you're doing your event planning. And then I wanted to say choices become lifestyle. This was also touched upon in the presentation on plant-based diets. But essentially, you want to give out party favors? The photographer idea wasn't that great? Okay. You can consider thrifted options. You want an outdoor event? Account for cleanup. Don't do that big-ass gender reveal that explodes everywhere. Take into account the places you are and the people who are there. And you're worried about transportation emissions, like I said, carpooling, transit, and more plant-based diet. And what about you? You might think, I'm not planning the Eras Tour. I'm not an event planner. Well, you have big life events. You are university students, you're going to graduate, you're probably going to have a graduation party. You are a human being who's alive, you're going to have birthday parties. You're probably going to get married, maybe you'll have kids, all these different things. Those are all events. You're going to have events in your life. So all of these ideas, maybe the political ones don't apply to you, but you can take from this what you need. Take from this what applies to you. Even if you attend events, you can make suggestions, you can leave reviews saying, hey, why didn't you use the Sustainable Dish Program? Why didn't you offer this? Why didn't you account for that? Sometimes people who are event planners don't think about these things. Maybe the company hasn't considered the needs of a group you're a part of. Make them aware of it. Don't be afraid to speak up on those issues. And now our favorite part, the SDGs. The Principles for Sustainable Event Addressing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So this was adapted from the, I think, UN Events Council in 2022. They've divided the I don't know why that picture's cut off, sorry. They've divided the goals into categories. So environmental practice, social practice, and economic practice. I don't want to address all of them, but I've categorized some examples. So SDG 5, gender equality. When you are going into your event, if you really want to address gender inequality, one of the things you can do is maybe hire companies that are women-owned. Maybe get your party favors from a women-owned business. Maybe host it at a women-owned cafe. That's something we're doing for our International Women's Day event at Women in Leadership that you should go to. For SDG 8, decent work and economic growth is also related to the idea of hosting. So if you are hosting an event, you have to consider a lot of things. You have to consider your location, transportation, like I said. But another thing you can think about are your own values. If sustainability is one of your values, maybe you don't want to be hosting at a venue that's owned by a company that, I don't know, invests in oil, for example, or you don't want to be buying your products from a company that uses unsafe labor practices or exploits workers in another country. There's many different ways that the choices you make in event planning and also in really any part of your life can impact sustainability. We also have sustainable cities and communities. When you're hosting an event, you really affect your community. Not to bring Taylor Swift into this again, but it was reported in a lot of economic journals that when she visited a city, she boosted that city's economy immensely. People were buying hotels, they were going out to a bar after they attended the concert, they were shopping. These economies were really bolstered by this large event. And of course, this is maybe, again, scaling it up a little, but these events like hockey games in Edmonton, those nights are people from small towns, they come up here, people from other cities, they fly in. We have it's a boon to our economy, but we also have to remember that it might not always be good for everyone. I know sometimes when I'm trying to get anywhere downtown during a hockey game, you can't, and people who live down there, unhoused peoples, are often shoved away from their homes. They're often swept, the streets, that's what it's called, street sweeping. They sweep the homeless encampments away from where, like the Junos, for example, were hosted in Edmonton, a very large event, and they cleared out the more unsightly parts of the population. So things like that aren't often considered. Those elements of our community that we don't often look at, that we like to look away from, we should still consider when we are doing something that may impact their lives and the way they're living. And of course, climate action I have here, and responsible consumption and production, that goes into that as well, is where are you sourcing your products, who's catering you, where are they getting their merchandise? Are they, I don't know, B certified? Are they adhering with the codes and values that you have for yourself and that you want to be promoting with your event? SDG 17, I feel like gets ignored a lot. It's the very last one. It's partnership for the goals, and it's about working together. Working together is the biggest part of event planning. Earlier, my friend Sasha was here. She had to leave, unfortunately, but she is the head of events for the Sustainable Development Goals Alliance. And she has to work with everybody. She has to work with marketing. She has to work with me as co-president. She has to work with the finance guys. She has to work with the university getting approval for these events, and then getting our sponsors, getting our space, getting tickets sold. All of these different collaborations can, again, be scaled up to larger things, such as bigger events that impact multiple communities, like a tour that we were talking about earlier that goes global, and even the workers at your events. Are they being paid well? Are they being taken care of? Are they given access? But partnership in every sense, in a holistic sense as well. And that's it, I'm done. If you want to ask me any questions, feel free to connect with me in all those places. But yeah.